Hidden behind steel doors lie the greatest stories the auto world forgot. From factory wars to near-death legends, this is Vaulted Wheels, unlocking the machines that built America.
Picture this. It's 1998, the Birmingham Motor Show. The curtains pull back and the Rover 75 is unveiled. We're talking a gorgeous, retro-styled executive saloon. It's heralded as an absolute triumph of British engineering, and get this, it's backed by virtually unlimited German capital. It should have been a massive victory lap, but within hours of its grand reveal, it would be instantly betrayed by its own creators. This singular moment kicks off one of the most astonishing, wild stories in modern automotive history.
The very man who was supposed to be celebrating this multi-million-dollar creation, BMW CEO Bernd Peischied takes the microphone. And instead of hyping it up, he launches into this completely poisonous outburst on live television. He actually threatens to shut down the Longbridge factory and publicly questions if Rover is even going to survive. I mean, think about that. He effectively torpedoed his own car before a single customer could even turn the key.
So you have to ask yourself, how on earth did a doomed, orphaned vehicle survive unprecedented corporate sabotage, not to mention brutal exploitation, only to eventually become the secret engine of a global superpower? Well, today we are breaking down exactly that in this explainer. It's a story of greed, sheer defiance, and brilliant engineering that absolutely refuse to quit.
Let's kick things off with Part 1, The Betrayal at Birth. Birmingham Motor Show, 1998.
On one side of the coin, you had a car that was essentially born from a blank check. BMW's engineers had created this British work of art that was so incredibly refined, critics were noting it was literally quieter than a Rolls-Royce. But on the flip side, you had this suffocating panic radiating from BMW's boardroom in Munich. Following that disastrous launch speech, the press had a field day. They instantly branded Rover the English patient.
And the human toll of all this corporate infighting? It was absolutely devastating. Inside the company, the reaction was described as pure, gobsmacked amazement and panic. You had clay modelers at Longbridge who were literally in tears, totally convinced the end was just days away. BMW had effectively completely abandoned their great white hope, and the workforce was just left there to watch their masterpiece sink in the showroom.
Moving right along to Part 2, the 10-pound takeover, from Munich to the Phoenix 4.
To give you a little context, BMW had originally bought Rover for £800 million back in 1994. But by 1999, the financial bleeding was just catastrophic. We're talking losses of £2 million a single day. This triggered all-out factional warfare and high-level resignations at the very top of BMW. Ultimately, they decided to break up the company, sell Land Rover to Ford, and basically flee the whole situation entirely in the year 2000.
And here is where things take a truly unbelievable twist. The entire physical car business, including the massive Longbridge factory and the brilliant Rover 75 platform itself, was sold off to a group known as the Phoenix Consortium. The price? A symbolic £10 note. £10! BMW even threw in a $500 million interest-free loan just to completely wash their hands of it.
But as you might guess, these new caretakers were definitely not the saviors they claimed to be. While MG Rover continued to just bleed to death right there on the factory floor, the Phoenix 4 set up this crazy labyrinth of shady financial structures to siphon off staggering wealth for themselves. I mean, they took a £10 investment and turned it into an estimated £42 million in personal pay and family enrichment. All of this while the actual company was actively collapsing all around them.
This brings us to Part 3. A V8 muscle rebellion. Engineering defiance.
Right in the middle of all this corporate abuse and financial decay, the Longbridge engineers decided to stage this magnificent act of rebellion. Going against all logic and working with virtually zero budget, the engineering team just decided to completely rip up the platform's architecture. They took this highly refined front-wheel drive executive saloon and completely re-engineered it to create the MG ZT260. And this thing was a roaring, rear-wheel drive, absolutely tire-shredding monster. To actually pull this off, they essentially crammed a massive 4.6-liter Ford V8 engine right into a refined sedan. The power output was so violent that during the early tests, the car suffered from something called axle tramp, meaning it was literally shaking itself to pieces. To figure it out, the engineers actually lashed the test cars directly to the factory floor to study the intense vibrations. They eventually had to custom-build heavy-duty shocks and a reinforced steel spine just to keep the car in one piece when you stepped on the gas. Now you have to understand, this project was never about saving the company financially. Everyone knew a niche V8 muscle car wasn't going to magically fix a billion-dollar deficit, right? No. This was a pure, defiant, emotional statement. It was about passion. It was about technical ingenuity and the immense pride of the engineers at a dying British icon. They just wanted to prove to the world exactly what they were truly capable of creating.
Let's look at Part 4, Collapse and Exile, the end of Longbridge.
Despite the truly brilliant engineering of the cars themselves, that grim financial reality orchestrated by the executives finally caught up with MG Rover. By 2004, the operating losses had skyrocketed to an absolute astronomical figure, £119 million. BMW, who were just watching this train wreck unfold from Munich, publicly branded the Phoenix 4 as the unacceptable face of capitalism.
The whole house of cards came down incredibly fast. As the Phoenix 4 kept securing profits for themselves, actual car sales plummeted. Eventually, unpaid suppliers just threw up their hands and refused to deliver parts to the factory. So in April 2005, MG Rover totally collapsed into administration. And the human cost here? It was heartbreaking. 6,300 workers were laid off with a pretty insulting $3,400 redundancy payment. The historic factory gates closed for good.
Which leads us to our final chapter, Part 5, the transnational resurrection, building a Chinese superpower.
Just when it looked like it was totally the end of the road, the remnants of the company became the target for two rival Chinese state-owned companies. Nanjing Automobile bought the physical assets right out of Longbridge, while SAIC secured the intellectual property rights to the Rover 75. So you had this brief, totally surreal moment where they were competing to build the exact same car. But eventually, by December 2007, the Chinese government stepped in and brokered a merger, finally uniting the Rover 75's fragmented legacy under a single roof.
There was one pretty massive hurdle, though. SAIC owned the car's design, sure, but they didn't actually own its name. BMW had sold the Rover trademark over to Ford to protect Land Rover, so SAIC just did the next best thing. They invented a new one, Roewe. It's derived from the German word for lion, and its Chinese pronunciation loosely translates to glorious power. They basically created an entirely new brand out of thin air just to capture that British prestige of the 75's original design.
And this right here is exactly why the survival of this orphaned car matters so much today. The Rover 75 platform wasn't just a pile of scrap metal. It became the vital technological DNA that allowed China's SAIC to transition from just a regional manufacturer into a modern global powerhouse. It essentially allowed them to leapfrog over decades of traditional research and development. That foundational engineering of our orphaned British car basically birthed an empire. Fast forward to today, and the reborn MG brand, utilizing all that technical momentum started by the 75, is now selling well over 840,000 vehicles annually around the entire world. Think about that for a second. The resilient engineering that was originally funded by BMW's billions has completely outlived the very executives who abused it. In this crazy act of true poetic justice, the reborn MG brand is now actively outselling the historic rivals like Land Rover and Peugeot that once looked down on it in the UK market. Ultimately, the orphan car that was sabotaged on its very first day, stripped of its original brand and horribly exploited by corporate greed, won in the end. Its engineering integrity was simply too good to fade away. Which leaves us with a truly fascinating question to ponder. Can a machine actually possess a spirit of defiance that simply refuses to die? And if it can, what other incredible engineering marvels are out there right now just waiting for their second chance?